much running to time. So, PowerShell, what does it do? Everything. Friggin' anything. Anything. Everything and anything. Send emails, talk direct to SQL servers, change files, especially if they're text files. It loves text files. Install roles and features. We've already seen that one. It can kick most of its data sets out as CSV, HTML, pretty much anything you like. You might already be aware I wrote a little PowerShell module to manage simple mailing lists. The chap who was talking about that on ITSSD yesterday, it doesn't have any functionality for the whitelists, I'm afraid. That just isn't implemented inside Simper. But you can use this to add users, remove users, create mailing lists, delete mailing lists as well. We're also working on using PowerShell to start configuring our network switches. So we have HPE Aruba switches. They have a RESTful interface on them now. And in the latest version of PowerShell version 6, which is still in the kind of beta and alpha stages, it's fixed a little bug that does allow us to talk to our network switches and make configuration changes to them through PowerShell. So bringing pretty much everything that we do to manage all our infrastructure under one single programming and scripting language. It can do interactive scripts where it asks you something and you reply back with a string or point it at a file or whatever you want, or non-interactive where it really does just sit on a server and once a morning at 7:30 it kicks off, does its thing and then starts sleeping. I did try and think of any true alternatives and I just put some random things up there so people can have a play with them. I'm sure they're all very good. I've never used any of them, sorry. So, first thing to do is enable the running of scripts. PowerShell by default doesn't allow you to run scripts that are locally saved on the machine. So we're going to create a new group policy and deploy this out to our computers. We're going to head through policies, administrative templates, Windows components, Windows PowerShell, and there's a little box somewhere which says enable the running of scripts on local machines. Now the execution policy will allow you to choose how rigorous you want to be. In this case, we're going to go local scripts and signed scripts. So once you've done that on your machines, you want to make sure you've got the very latest version of PowerShell on those computers. If you're running Windows 10, you really don't need to worry about that now, but if you've got Windows 7 machines, Server 2008 R2 or such like, you will need to update PowerShell on those machines. You can get that from the link down there in the bottom left-hand corner, and you after download WMF. So PowerShell is part of something called the Windows Management Framework, or WMF. You install that on your machine, and you're good to go. To check that you're on the latest version of PowerShell, right-click at the Start menu, kick off PowerShell, $PS version table. Hit Enter. If you see something like 5.1, you're probably there already. So let's have a quick little play with what PowerShell can do in a very simple environment. First, we're going to start out with discovering what's called Commandlets. So PowerShell is written around the notion of verb noun. So get-help, get-services, get AD user and such like, or new AD user, for example. So to play with services, we're going to kick off PowerShell as an administrator on our machine. And first we want to know what we can do with services. So get-help, you can tab autocomplete through the options. Star service, do we want to update help? Well, I should probably have pressed yes, but it would have taken ages. And it will give us a list of all the things that PowerShell can do to services. So we've got get, new, restart, resume, all kinds of fun and interesting things. So let's do get service and run it. And we get a horrible list, which is useless. So we'll pipe that into outgrid view. Outgrid view then allows us a little search functionality so we can see what those services are doing. And let's look at the Windows Update service in this instance. So how about we go get service, and we're going to say specifically the name of the service that we're interested in. And look, there's that service, just one service. And we can equally so pipe that to outgrid view as well and get it in that nice graphical user interface way. So how about we do something more interesting to it, like stop service. And we can kill that. And I think I do get service again, and we'll see it's now stopped. Ooh, magic. And equally so, start the services up again. So PowerShell really focused around verb noun. hopefully it makes things pretty easy to discover. So if you want to do something to do with AD users, get-help space star AD. You'll probably get 1,000,001 things for AD user, for example. So to help us get through PowerShell and to make scripts and do more fun and interesting things, we don't want to use the PowerShell prompt. That's useless. Let's use PowerShell Ife. This will be installed on your computers by default. And it gives us a nice long list on the right hand side of pretty much everything PowerShell can do on that machine with what it has available to it. It's got drop down autocompletes and our hello world example. We're going to choose a foreground color of red, I think, once I finally figure out what I'm doing. And running that with F5 will output to the prompt hello world. Equally so, we can explore all of the PowerShell commandlets on the right hand side. There's a search box there, so we don't have to worry about using get help. This is just the machine with its basic install. You can see how long that list would potentially be given how small the scrolling bar there is. So PowerShell remoting. PowerShell is useless unless you're going to run it against other machines. So typically you'd have your administrative computer, you'd have your set of servers, your set of clients. You want to execute remote commands against them. If you're running Server 2012 or Windows 8 or higher, PowerShell will already be enabled for remoting for you on domain and private networks, and public networks it will only allow it on the local subnet. One thing to bear in mind for coffee shops and such like. By default, only administrators can use PowerShell. PowerShell will always execute on the machine in the context of the user that you're logged in as. Hopefully that made sense. So if you're logged in as a basic user, you will only ever be able to execute basic user things on that computer. If you're logged in as the full domain administrator, crack on deleting virtual machines and destroying people's lives. If you've got older clients, so Server 2008 R2, Windows 7, Windows Vista, enable -ps remoting space-force will turn PowerShell on that machine. Equally so, you can configure that through group policy. You can test connections to the machine, so if you're having some weird thing where your remote command won't work, you can use test wsman and then the host name to that machine. One important little note about PowerShell, you should always be using the host names. It will send everything over encrypted connections. If you're using IP addresses, it doesn't particularly appreciate that. So PowerShell is no fun without things to administer that are remote. So let's get hold of the remote server administration tools. Download from Microsoft, again free. If you're running Windows Server 2016, you need to be running Windows 10 to administer it. If you're running Server 2008 R2, you need to be running Windows 7 to administer it. You need to download the appropriate tools for the appropriate operating system that you're managing. RSAT, nice little download. It shows you all the fun and interesting things you can do with it. Select the right operating system and then kick off the install for the version of Windows that you're running at that time. In this case, Windows 10 1709 in the 64-bit flavor. And there are still versions available for 1703, 1607 and all the way back to when Windows 10 was first kicked out. The installation effectively runs as a Windows update on your machine. One little thing to note is that every time you move from Windows version or to Windows version, so when 1709 becomes 1803, you'll need to go to the Microsoft website again, download the latest version of RSAT, install that on your machine. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there and you'll be wondering, where's my Active Directory management console? So if you've not already used RSAT, quick little tour around it. So you've got Active Directory users and computers. So instead of logging into your domain controllers, you can manage your Active Directory domain from your client PC, group policy management console, Hyper-V tools, certificate stores, pretty much anything you can manage on a Windows server, with the minor exception of Internet Information Services for some strange reason, you can run through RSAT. So with RSAT installed on our computer, that now gives us access to all the PowerShell tools that Windows Server has. Things like managing Active Directory, things like starting and stopping Hyper-V virtual machines. So let's do some fun with PowerShell in ISE. So I think we're going to run get computer. Oh, it's another video that I forgot to set as auto run. There we go. So we're going to look for the Active Directory. These are all the different things we can do with AD. And we're going to go get AD computer. That'll give us a nice option on the right hand side of what our parameters are. In this case, we're going to just use the filter of star to return pretty much everything. Hitting enter, and we get a nice little list of every machine that's inside the directory. Equally so, we can output that to an outgrid view and see the machines that we've got on the domain with various different attributes of that, and we can get pretty much any attribute that's inside AD out of it as well, or we could export that to a CSV once I figure out how to do a colon and not a pipe, and that I need another backward slash, not a full stop, and we eventually get there, and that will kick that information out as a CSV. So if you've got other tools that you want to manage your computers with, but you can use PowerShell to at least extract the information out of Windows. And there's our nice CSV. So how about doing something a little bit more useful, like creating a AD account inside Active Directory? So in this case, this is an interactive script. It's using read host. It's asking me what's the user's first and last name. We've used Jim Bob. The password is used as a secure string, so it will give you a little prompt which hides the password, and it goes off and creates that account for you. So we can then kick that off and say, hey, look, this is the account that we've just created. So PowerShell, just making scripts like this, it would take you forever. So what we want to do with PowerShell is make proper tools, things that you can reuse on a regular basis, things that you can just pop out of nowhere and go, I need to create a new account, quick, run. So for that, PowerShell has the notion of modules. So here we've created a bit more of a complicated script. We've wrapped it around in a function. We're going to save that inside the Windows PowerShell modules folder on the user's documents area inside Windows. We're going to give another subfolder name, which is the same as the function that we're creating. And we're then going to save that as a PSM1 file. That's a PowerShell module file in its very basic form. So when we close PowerShell and open it up again, that module would be imported inside PowerShell, and we can kick it off just by typing kc new. Or King's new. So AD account, that gives us the parameters that we can choose that we defined earlier. So forename Jim, surname Bob. When we kick that off, it will then prompt for the password, and then it will promptly fail because I forgot to delete the account before I recorded this video. Red text, that looks bad. So how does it work at Queen's? How does PowerShell work at Queen's for our use? That PowerShell folder, which is inside documents, or your user account's documents, Windows PowerShell, can be expanded with a few other folders. So modules, these are all the tools that you've made. Scripts, that's really just a dumping ground. Snippets are little sections of PowerShell scripts that you've used that one day you're going to use again. So things like making a new function. And then profile.ps1. Every time you launch a PowerShell interactive window, it will also load that PowerShell profile ps1 file. Now inside that file, we've created a little script which will copy from our SMB share all the new modules that we've created since we last launched PowerShell and overwrite them on the user's directory. Now obviously you can use many other different ways of managing that, be it through some form of Git service, maybe you're hosting it on a web service or something like that, whatever works for you. So, little list of almost everything we've made so far that's PowerShell modules and tools. We've got full complete modules which have a manifest file and multiple scripts inside them, like the PSSimper utility that we wrote. And then you've got the very basic ones which just use PSM1. In this case, QC get servers. Just by running that, it goes out and queries AD with a file that I've already defined to go and look out for all our AD servers and return them. So this is the file that we use, our profile.ps1 file that copies over all the changes from our central store. It also puts out a little prompt there that says, hey, if something has changed, close PowerShell, open it up again to apply those changes inside PowerShell. So one of our quite regularly used tools, when we've got a contractor inside the college and we want to provide them with network access, we do that through our network policy server and 8021X authentication. And what this PowerShell module does, it asks us what's the MAC address of the client, what's the first name, last name of the user, what company are they from, what's the general description of their machine, what's their email address, and how long do we want the account to be valid for. And then finally it says, hey, which network should they also be allowed into? So we've got pure internet access, no access to internal services. That'll stick them in VLAN 11. If we want them access to our privileged environment for some strange and interesting reason, welcome to VLAN 4. And then finally, if they're just there to look at the BMS system, we can stick them inside the BMS network. Now that's set as a valid set, so PowerShell will provide you that as a drop-down list option to say, hey, which network do you want them to join? It then uses a switch, which is a pretty common term in these things, to then take whatever answer you've provided and set variables accordingly. So one of those being the network ID, which is a term used inside Active Directory to say, hey, this is the group ID of that machine. And another one which is really just the name of the Active Directory group they're being joined to. There's a little bit of validation inside there, so it basically says if the MAC address isn't equal to 12 characters, kick out the script, provide a little prompt that says you've been a numpty, you need to put 12 characters inside there. Once it creates the script, we've also got a couple of sleeps inside there to allow AD to catch up as it's creating that account, and it also replaces the primary group on that account. So pretty much anything that you can do inside the GUI tools of Windows for any administrative purposes you can do inside PowerShell. So a couple of other things that we use inside Queens. Hopefully I sanitize these to make sure that none of them reveal interesting information. So one of those is querying an SQL server. So our SQL server, which stores all the information about all the devices which are connected to the domain, whether they be authenticated by security certificate, MAC address, username, password. QC get MAC address port will return based upon the MAC address of the machine, where the machine was last plugged in, be that in a wireless access point or a physical network switch, and also which switch or which wireless access point it was plugged into. So that way, if we get a detection from Oxa that says, hey, we've seen malicious traffic, we've gone through our DHCP logs to figure out, hey, this was this client, let's go figure out well, where it's plugged in at the moment. We can do that through this script pretty quickly. Next one, you can do things like tap into the Windows event log through PowerShell. In this case, it's just returning the last 50 events on our print server for the print service. Every now and again, someone will say, hey, did that print job send? Or something along those lines. Very quickly run this, get a list of the last 50 events. Oh yeah, there's your print job, you sent it this. Unfortunately, it was 4,000 pages, so it was then rejected. One of my favorite ones, create a new test virtual machine. Taps into Hyper-V, says, hey, I'm going to create a new virtual machine with this name. I'm going to prefix it with the word test. I'm going to have a default of 4 GB of RAM. It's going to connect to our network. This is where it's going to save the virtual hard disk, and it's going to have 4 virtual CPU cores. It's also going to go into our client's network. So when we run this script, I've created a virtual machine called cheese. That goes off and talks out to Hyper-V on that machine, creates that virtual machine for me, and provides me a little log at the end. And then once I'm done with that virtual machine and I don't want it anymore, delete test VM. This pops up a window which wasn't actually captured by this, which says these are all the test virtual machines that you're running at the moment. Which one would you like to delete? Select the appropriate virtual machine, press OK, and eventually it will then obliterate that machine, not only from the Hyper-V host as well, but if that machine was ever domain joined, it will delete it from Active Directory as well for you. So making sure things are cleaned up and tidied up. One of the things I'm really hoping that the Sophos guys will kick out pretty soon, as some of you might be aware, is a nice RESTful API for the Sophos Cloud Console. That way I can also delete machines from the Sophos Cloud Console without having to go in there and log in and delete stuff, and oh, it takes forever. Otherwise I could just use one single script, select one machine, and do actions in 300-400 different places. Test global DNS. In this case, we've just said, hey, reach out to all these DNS servers, return what their responses are for a query. We use, another shameless plug for myworldofit.net, a backup script which reaches in using WinSCP to all our network switches, takes a copy of their current running config, and then saves that onto the local server. Now, PowerShell is built around the .NET Core framework. So if you ever come across any libraries that work with .NET, you can probably tap into them with PowerShell. One of the most obscure ones I ever came up with was SIMS. Capita SIMS, it's a school's information management system. That's built around .NET. Guess what? You can tap straight into it with PowerShell. It took me absolutely ages to figure out how it works though. So in this case, this script is simply loading up the DLL that it needs, reading a CSV which has all the host names and credentials required to connect to the machines, reaches out to those individual switches and saves a copy of the config, grouping them by the switch name and also the date. So, interactive scripts, absolutely fantastic. Here's just a small sample of some of the scripts we're running right now that run automatically. Be that 7:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. We've got things like reading the CUD feed and creating our Active Directory accounts. Things like getting hold of the backup reports and then emailing them out to the IT office for us to examine. One of the things that was a little bit of a niche topic, exporting students' special diets. So we had a specific request from our conference office saying, hey, can we get a list of the students? That sounds rude. Can we get a list of all the students with special diets? Absolutely fantastic. Can we have that updated daily? Okay, let's not get the finance guys to do that. Let's not get the college office to do that. Let's figure out the SQL required to take that from the database, dump it into a PowerShell script, export it as a CSV. There it is for them. We use Freshdesk as our help desk. We have a CSV which has tasks that we do on a regular basis. Things like go check that the server room hasn't caught on fire. Things like take a backup of XYZ that we can't automate yet. So every morning at 7:30, just as I'm on the bus on the way into work, it then puts those tickets straight into our help desk via its RESTful API. David might have hijacked that for personal purposes as well. We've got another script inside there, detects privileged group changes. So that reaches into the machine, reaches into AD. We've established a list of groups that we're interested in. If we see an elevation on any of those groups, alert us. That runs once an hour. One day I'll figure out how to get that to run instantly. And even things like an RSS reader. So we've made a little reader inside PowerShell that will generate tickets inside our help desk for topics that might be of interest to me. So I don't have the time to go scrolling around the web all the day. So why not read things straight from Reddit? Why not read things straight from the Palo Alto security blog and have those generated as tickets, so actionable items for me for things to do, and mark them as resolved once done. So backup server has all those scripts on. PowerShell really isn't just about Microsoft services. It is now cross-platform in the sense that you can run PowerShell on both OS X and Linux services. The PowerShell Gallery is Microsoft's kind of publicly created list of everything else that anyone has ever done with PowerShell that was really fun and interesting. So there's third-party tools for things like tapping into MySQL, definitely not a Microsoft product, or VMware, talking into your VMware servers. So you can deliver the same things like creating a test virtual machine using PowerShell, bringing all your scripting environments under the same single umbrella. Further reading, lynda.com really does have some excellent things on PowerShell. Not only does it have complete step-by-step, this is every single last feature, it also has, these are common use cases of PowerShell, go use them in your environment. Things that you could literally pick up and run with right away. And then of course another shameless plug for my blog. Any questions, or is it just going to be me talking today? Go on then.
Are you happy to share your PowerShell scripts that you've created already?
The large majority, yes. There are a limited number for fun and interesting reasons that I can't. On my blog, I do have a number of ones which are things like the network switch backup, things that we use for the RSS reader and so on. I'm slowly figuring out which ones that really I can put on things like GitHub and so on. So they'll be up there eventually. Got it?
Some people are afraid about this PowerShell stuff being enabled on all the devices out there and things. And I noticed that you said by default it's enabled on your local domain.
Yep.
Things even when you're on the private. Any comments on?
So PowerShell, without using it for malicious purposes, where there's special privilege execution bugs inside Windows that someone's just discovered, will only ever execute at the permission level of the user that's running it. So if you really do just have your basic user and they type get-AD user, enter, if they don't have permissions to read AD, they won't get anything. The commandlets can be there, the tools can be there, but it's built around the same security framework that Windows has. Just as earlier when we were installing roles and features on the server and stopping services, that requires specific elevation as an administrative account. That requires you to specifically right-click on it, run as administrator, get the UAC prompt, press yes. Now obviously a lot of malware these days is hidden inside PowerShell scripts, VBS scripts. Most of the time that's just reach out somewhere, download something, run it on the machine. Now, to be honest, if you haven't got an antivirus service which can block that kind of thing, like InterceptX, which we're using, which is fantastic, by the way, you really need to consider those kind of mitigations instead of saying, let's forget about this awesome remote management tool. The other thing, run PowerShell at its most recent version. So just like any other software that you patch and update, don't sit around with computers that are running PowerShell version 2. Get them updated to PowerShell 5.1 and 6 when it comes out. Anyone else? Go on then.
Have you ever tried using the desired state configuration?
No, I really want to. So desired state configuration is Microsoft's equivalent of Puppet. Here's the state that I want this machine to be in. Go and configure it like that. If it ever deviates from that state, send it back. There's guides for it on lynda.com. To be honest, in our scale of environment, we're running about 24 virtual machines, all of which have specific unique purposes with the exception of the domain controllers. It hasn't really hit me as something I need to worry about yet. But if you're running a server farm of 100 machines, 20 of which are web servers, 20 of which are data center servers for SQL Server or whatever, you should probably be looking at DSC as well. And that really is Microsoft's equivalent of Puppet. Anyone else? Nope. How are we doing on time? Wow, we are overrunning already. 10 minutes of the next presentation, then I think it's break for coffee. I know it's really cold in here. At some point we'll figure out if we can do star jumps to warm up.